King of Cards is finally here. It's been almost 2.5 years since Spectre of Torment came out. We've all been waiting anxiously for King of Cards, and now it's finally time for me, that guy who won't shut up about the phase locket for some reason, to give my opinion on King of Cards. So, is King of Cards good? Yeah, of course it's good. What kind of question is that? Yeah, of course it's good. This is Shovel Knight we're talking about. It's great. I mean, we all knew it was going to be great, but the real question is, how does it compare to the other 3 campaigns? Well, this video is going to attempt to answer that, but more broadly, this is just a review of King of Cards. We'll go over the 3 criteria I originally used to rank each campaign, and at the end of each section I'll place King of Cards. Keep in mind that a low rank in any of the categories does not mean bad. Oh, and I'll throw in a quick little thing about Shovel Knight Showdown at the end, I guess. You got all that? Alright, good. Then listen up, because we got a lot to cover. We are going to start with the gameplay this time, because as you might expect, this is by far the most important to me, and it's the category where I've got the most to say. So fundamentally, I think King Knight is a character much more defined by his limitations than by his strengths, and that's not a bad thing. This comes through both in his basic moveset and in his unique level gimmicks. He's equipped with a shoulder bash that pops him up into a spinning jump similar to Shovel Knight's shovel drop, but only if he connects with an enemy or certain terrain. The terrain that you can't bounce off is marked in the same way that Spectre of Torment marked terrain that you can't use for a wall jump. And this is part of what I mean by King Knight's limitations. He has access to a move almost identical to Shovel Knight's most bread and butter attacking move, but he also has to use an enemy or the environment to access that move. I really like this design because, and this is something I've talked about before on this channel, it forces you to consider the environment as part of your gameplay strategy, not just as an obstacle to overcome. A wall in King of Cards is more than just a wall. It's an opportunity to attack an enemy without having to charge at them head-on like a boosted ape. It's that weaving together of combat and platforming, where there's more than just having enemies around while platforming. It's about using the very nature of platformer level design to make combat more interesting and dynamic, by encouraging you to use the environment to fight. In my opinion, this is the rock-solid core of King Knight's gameplay, and I think it works fantastically. You can also roll, which adds a bit of extra depth to the shoulder bash, you can dash in midair, and the dash resets if you jump on an enemy, and you can cancel a dash at any point after initiating it if you change your mind. There's a surprising amount of mechanical depth to King Knight's gameplay, which is going to make this campaign incredibly replayable. I also like that his health is a bit lower, but hearts drop occasionally from hitting enemies. It actually took me a few levels to realize this, but King Knight's hearts each represent only 1 hit, where Shovel, Plague, and Spectre all have circles that represent 2 hits each. And this means that King Knight is inherently a much more frail character than any of the other knights, which I think suits his character quite well. He's an arrogant little mama's boy, like of course he can't take a hit as well as the rest of them. And maybe I'm just rusty, but honestly this felt like the most challenging campaign yet, partially due to King Knight's unique and tough to master basic moveset, but also due to the heirlooms. Heirlooms are King Knight's items, which I finally found out after years of playing the game are just called sub-weapons. Yeah, who knew? I got a million comments on all those videos, and none of you guys told me that? Yeah, whatever. And since I know I probably have something of a reputation these days as that guy who's really mad about the phase locket for some reason, I am incredibly happy to report that heirlooms are actually quite well balanced. A lot of them function in novel and unexpected ways, and best of all, a lot more were clearly designed with high risk and high reward in mind. And King Knight's levels are hard enough that I felt like I needed the heirlooms a lot of the time and wasn't just using them as a crutch. They help in more interesting ways than a lot of previous items. For example, we can compare King Knight's most useful platforming item, the Bubble Frog, to Spectre Knight's best platforming item, the Hover Plume. Spectre's is a simple upward boost, fairly easy to control, not especially costly, if I remember correctly, and once upgraded makes you completely invincible. There's really no downside to using it. Now let's take a look at King Knight's bubble. Upon activation, King Knight hides in a bubble with no upward movement, about the same amount of sideways movement as Spectre Knight, and most importantly, it resets your shoulder bash. Here's why I like it more. It's not an automatic save, and you can very easily mess it up. You can still get hit while using it, plus if you find yourself below where you want to be, you're going to have to scan the environment to make sure there's something you can shoulder bash to get the height you need. There's a little bit more risk involved with using this item, but the potential reward is appropriately high. Now, not every item is a standout, but I wouldn't expect them to be. The Propeller Blitz Steed is a simple, useful projectile, and the Dueling Glove is just like Plague Knight's Staff of Striking, close range but high damage output. And yes, I know I really undersold the Staff of Striking in that video. My bad, I guess. I like both of these a lot. They're not super powerful, but they had a regular place in my arsenal. I didn't really find a whole lot of use for the Scepter of Swiftness, the Confetti Horns, or the Suicide Rats, but they were fun to mess around with, and they're inoffensive, I guess, in terms of how strong they are. And since again, King Knight's basic moves feel a little less powerful to me than the other characters, I felt more incentive to use his items in creative ways. The Heart Hammer is the item that I kind of thought would end up being the problem item for this campaign, but it actually might be my favorite item in the whole game. The Will Skull was a little too useful for its own good, and it ended up making Spectre of Torment's campaign a little less interesting in terms of challenge on the first playthrough. But fortunately, the Heart Hammer's risk and reward are perfectly balanced, as all things should be. Hitting an enemy with it will spew out a heart or two, but you still have to collect the hearts, and there were desperate boss fights where I was swinging wildly with the hammer, hoping to land a hit, and then I had to make a mad scramble to gather up the hearts scattered around the arena while I was low on health, and it certainly wasn't strategic or all that skillful, but it was fun, it was tough, and even with an item, it felt balanced. The Scorching Saber, Gyro Boots, and Turncoat were some other standout items, ones that felt useful but not overpowered, a little niche but not so niche that I forgot about them, and on top of all that, they were fun to use without ever feeling like I was cheapening the experience. So, not to rehash those old item videos, but I think one of the biggest problems with items in the other campaigns, and one of the reasons I really hate the "if you don't like it, don't use it" argument, is simply that items could have been so much more, and that I wanted to use them. I wanted to be able to use items without feeling like I was breaking the game or ruining the challenge. Since a few of them were just a little too powerful, that fun process of problem solving and deciding which item would be best for a given scenario was just kind of made too easy, since a lot of the time the obvious answer was either the Phase Locket, the Will Skull, or the Skeletal Sentry, and I guess the Propeller Dagger and Hover Plume to somewhat lesser extents. When you've just got a handful of items that can solve a majority of your problems, it's not really as interesting to play as it could be. And I know that's kind of the price that you have to pay for making items completely optional, but I don't know, it felt like a missed opportunity to me to make items feel more viable but balanced if you want to use them. Instead, what we have is a game where, in 90% of situations, the same one or two items generally is going to get the job done. It feels like I'm talking about income inequality in America. You know, it's like 20% of the items in Shovel Knight control 90% of the usefulness, you know? Is that starting to make sense? It's not that the item balance is horrific and atrocious and ruins the game, it's just that I would have liked to be able to use them and still feel like I was playing the game, instead of feeling like I was cheaping out, you know? Now, not to say that I know everything about how best to approach every challenge in Spectre, Shovel, or Plague Knight. That's not what I'm saying. I like having lots of tools to use and thinking about how best to apply them to solve a difficult problem. And this is what Spectre Knight's New Game Plus I thought did really well, and King Knight doesn't do it to quite the same level, but it comes pretty close. If I was feeling like being harsh on King Knight, I would probably say that the Bubble Frog is a little too good at trivializing platforming, but to be completely honest, I'm just kind of happy that King Knight's finally here, and item balance only ever seems like a huge deal when I talk about it because, like I said in those previous videos, it's really the only negative for me to talk about with Shovel Knight. And all the good stuff, everybody kind of already knows at this point, so I have to find something different to talk about. Now, I will say that I'm not including King Knight's New Game Plus mode in this video because I know it's been like a month, but I just haven't had the time to play it yet. But also, it seems like a pretty unique and cool mode, and it might be worth its own video. If you guys would want to see that, let me know in the comments. So moving on from items, let's talk about King Knight's actual levels. It should be no surprise at this point that Yacht Club are masters of level design, and King of Cards is absolutely no exception. These are some of the most creative, intricately designed, and challenging levels I've ever seen. Old level gimmicks are reused here in ways that perfectly complement King Knight's moveset, and the new level gimmicks are clever and fun. I especially like the ones that, like I said before, give King Knight new limitations to work around. In the Lich Yard, you've got this purple gooey floor that prevents jumping but still allows the shoulder bash to work, and in the Lost City, you've got these piles of rocks that you have to make sure not to spin onto or they'll drop you into lava. Polar Knight's levels have ice rails that force you to keep moving while on them with a hilariously dainty skating animation. The list goes on. All this to basically say that the level-specific gimmicks and overall level design in King of Narts. All this to basically say that the level-specific gimmicks and overall level design in King Knight is just as great as we've come to expect from Yacht Club. No notes here, honestly. It's great. Now, unfortunately, I do have some criticism here, not of the individual level design, but of the broader gameplay structure. King of Cards ditches the old-school Mega Man approach and goes with a more Super Mario 3 style. Gone is the long, grueling handful of levels, each with a boss at the end. Now there are a lot more shorter stages, each usually focused on exploring its own gimmick or two, a lot of levels with hidden exits that unlock different paths throughout the map, and there won't always be a boss at the end of each main level since, well, there aren't really main levels anymore. Now everything kind of starts to feel like one of Shovel Knight's side levels, and a lot of bosses just show up on the map without any real fanfare. I have to say, I'm not really a fan of this more disjointed structure compared to the other campaigns. More stages and alternate paths means a lot more replaying stages, and it means there's not always the guaranteed payoff of a fun boss at the end of each level. I guess you could say I felt a little disoriented by King Knight's overarching framework. With the previous campaigns, each level's visual themes and unique mechanics could be explored in a very tightly structured way. Each new environment in the other campaigns progressed visually and mechanically over the course of a single long level. With King Knight, I was often bouncing around between environments within each map screen. You might finish a level set in the Flying Machine and immediately go into a level in the Clockwork Tower, using a whole new set of gimmicks and a completely different visual style. And this is where I admit that this is an entirely subjective complaint. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with this more piecemeal approach to level design. I just didn't find it as satisfying to play. The careful introduction and expansion of new gameplay mechanics is still here, it just tends to happen in much smaller scale than it does in the other campaigns. And it doesn't really, flow as nicely. It's hard to describe, but I think that's probably the best way to phrase it. King Knight's individual levels are great, but the overall flow just isn't quite there. That's probably my biggest complaint with King of Cards besides, well, we'll get to that, and that's not even really a complaint anyway. You'll see. So, where would I rank King Knight's gameplay? I think I can place it at a solid second place to Spectre Knight, above Shovel Knight at third and Plague Knight at fourth. My complaint about the flow of the game is relatively minor, but I think it's enough to put it just below Spectre Knight. But the superior item balance and more interesting complex gameplay is enough to put it over Shovel Knight. And remember, Plague Knight fans, fourth place isn't bad. Plague Knight is stuck at the bottom here, mostly because his campaign recycles all of Shovel Knight's levels, and the level design doesn't cater directly to his unique gameplay style. And also the subjective fact that I just didn't really like it as much. I don't know. So, moving on to the story, and spoilers are in full effect for this section. The story of King of Cards is very light, it's very funny, and I think it's a perfectly fitting send-off for Shovel Knight as a whole. There are a lot of fun characters, the standout of which is probably King Knight himself. He's actually a surprisingly endearing character. His transparent awfulness and childish attitude somehow made me kinda like him. Well, maybe like is the wrong word. I enjoyed watching King Knight's antics, but I wouldn't want to hang out with him. The story has a much more upbeat, adventurous tone, almost anime-like with its silly, overconfident protagonist and constantly expanding entourage of weird friends. I guess that's more JRPG than strictly anime, but whatever. The point is it's fun and I like it, even if it's not all that deep. King Knight is really into the new card game of the land and decides to exploit a pretty funny loophole in the card battling world that allows him to become the King of Cards just by defeating all three Joustus judges, not necessarily in the card game. King Pridemore, who King Knight usurps as vengeance for hitting on his mom, the Troupple King, who's still as weirdly cute as ever, and the mysterious King Birder are your three main bosses for the campaign. By the end of the game, the judges are all defeated, the Enchantress reveals her plot to gather the kings of the land and use their magic to do something evil. I don't know, it's the Enchantress. What did you expect? One awesome boss fight and several nights worth of nightmares later, and King Knight is victorious. And that's when the Enchantress offers King Knight the kingdom he's always wanted. All he has to do is betray his friends. Which, of course, he does. It's King Knight. What did you expect? So as I said, it's not exactly deep, and I don't think it was ever going to beat Shovel Knight just for sheer emotional impact, but King Knight's story is different, it's hilarious, and it gets the job done. I enjoyed King Knight, but I genuinely liked Shovel and Plague Knight, and also Plague Knight's little romance story continues to be intensely relatable, so I have to put King Knight in third place below those two. Spectre Knight's story, unfortunately, is going to stay in last, mostly because of Spectre Knight's personality not being especially appealing to me. Shovel and Plague Knight were all either more interesting or just more fun to watch. Plus, the dark tone and emotional payoff at the end just weren't as well executed, I think, as Shovel Knight's drama. King Knight gets third here, really just barely below Plague Knight. So, for music. This might surprise a lot of you, but I think music is actually King of Cards' weakest aspect. Not that any of the music is bad, it's just that you don't really get to hear the new stuff all that much. Spectre Knight's soundtrack was so impressive to me because every main level track was completely redone, and they all sound just as good, if not better. King of Cards, unfortunately, only has 2 new platforming areas, the Troupple Pond and Birder Mountain, both of which have their own great original songs, but the rest of the levels just reuse either the Shovel of Hope or Spectre of Torment version of each level theme. I mostly judge the campaign soundtrack by the level and boss themes, since those are what I spend most of the time playing and listening to. And there's just not that much new here in King of Cards. If you'll recall, I really couldn't decide between Spectre and Shovel taking number 1 in terms of soundtrack, and there's still a lot more new stuff here than there was in Plague of Shadow. So I'll give King Knight 2nd place for music. Or I guess 3rd, since 1st is tied. But Hyve, I hear you say. The soundtrack for King of Cards is the biggest one yet. There's 40 frickin' tracks on that beast. That's true, but if you take a closer look, well, unfortunately for me personally, a lot of the new music in King of Cards is found in its biggest new feature, Joustus. This was the main thing that I was worried about going into King of Cards. I'm not much for strategy generally. Given the right context, I can get into it, but card games are just really not my thing. That said, Joustus is mercifully optional to finish the game, and it seems pretty accessible and fun from what I can tell. Did I play that much of it? No. I only played the tutorial level, and then I fought through one of the Joustus levels just to get to Mona because I definitely don't have a huge crush on this tall, beautiful, funny green lady. Why do you think I said Plague Knight is relatable? So yeah, instead of pretending like I know anything about deck building or card game balance or strategy, I'm just gonna admit my ignorance and say that I didn't really play much Joustus. It's not my kind of game, but it also seems fine as far as I can tell. I am very appreciative of the fact that it's optional, but I do applaud Yacht Club for putting so much effort into Joustus. A little minigame like this could easily have been an annoying forced time sink in some other games that I promise I'll stop throwing shade at one of these days. But Yacht Club is nothing if not a class act, and they clearly put their best effort into every single feature of Shovel Knight Treasure Trove, even if a few of those features don't really appeal to my personal taste. So yeah, that's my take on Joustus. It's not really my thing, and I'm not gonna pretend like I know more than I do. So, how are we going to place this game overall? Now, if you'll remember that ranking video from way back in 2017, I placed Spectre Knight at 1st place, Shovel Knight at 2nd, and Plague Knight in 3rd. It was always going to be hard to beat Spectre of Torment in my opinion, and though King of Cards makes a great effort, even being better than Spectre of Torment in some important aspects such as item balance, I still have to give Spectre of Torment the win. And while I know this may seem crazy to some of you, the gameplay score is very, very heavily weighted in this ranking. So heavily weighted that I'm just gonna be completely honest with you guys here, it's really the only one that matters. I mentioned this in the original ranking video, but I could have been clearer. Gameplay is the reason that I play games. The whole ranking them on other aspects thing was really just a gimmick that I made up for the video to give it some structure, but the real truth is that the overall ranking was always going to be the same as the gameplay ranking. So yeah, sorry if any of you feel cheated by that, but that's just how I play games. And remember that this is not a definitive list, this is just my personal ranking. Spectre Knight could have had 0 new music and a totally garbage story, but the gameplay would still put it at number 1 for me. And if you disagree, that's fine. I read every comment on every one of my videos, so if you want to leave your own rankings below, your reasons why you think I put too much value on gameplay, whether you disagree with me, whatever. As long as you're not a dick, I want to hear what you have to say. So there's my rankings. Spectre Knight 1st, King Knight 2nd, Shovel Knight 3rd, and Plague Knight, little buddies, still in 4th. Now, I was originally going to save King of Cards New Game Plus and Showdown for their own videos. Like I said, I may still make a video about King of Cards New Game Plus if people are interested, so comment below if you want to see a video about that. But as for Showdown, alright, here's my take on Showdown. This is gonna sound a little like my Joustus thing. It is an incredibly impressive effort. Very polished, very cool, and with a surprising amount of content. But, much like Joustus, it just isn't really for me. Just so everybody's aware, I'm one of those weirdos who still plays Melee, though I'm nowhere close to being actually good at it, and my friends and I play Smash Ultimate exclusively with items off, just to give you an idea of what kind of multiplayer appeals to me. These kinds of party games just don't really do a lot for me. And again, while Showdown is a very impressive feature, it just doesn't have that level of mechanical complexity for me to want to spend much time with it. Each character has so few moves, and in my short time playing, it didn't feel incredibly balanced. It's a neat little diversion, but it's not something I or any of my friends would really have an interest in playing for more than a few minutes. Sorry, Yacht Club. I love you guys, but Showdown just isn't really for me. But, you know, it came free with King of Cards, so I'm not gonna complain about it. So yeah, that is gonna do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about King of Cards from me. I'm sorry this took so long, but, you know, I got a job, man. You know, I work for a living, bro. But anyway, like, comment, subscribe, etc. Do the YouTube things, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.